I do want to go to Warrior Toughness because my question is, when you went over to Great Lakes, you went over knowing that you were going to be involved in this program already?
No. And so basically what happened, I came on to do the Dive Motivator program. And so it was essentially, I was going to be there for, I think it was a 3-year billet, and I had like 4 years left in the military. So I'm like, I think that's right. I think I'm speaking truth right there. And so I was there, and I was probably at year 2, and the chief of naval personnel goes through this whole review. So you had some shit going on in the fleet, right? Some missiles being fired at ships, right? Some, all the while set against the backdrop of like, hey, no shit. Like our senior leaders, right? We're like, we may be facing open naval seas combat, the likes in which we never have seen since World War II, right? Our peers, near peer competitors, the Russians, the Chinese, whomever that might be, we got to fucking level it up. Right. And right now our sailors aren't there. Right. Because, when I came in the Navy, right, maybe it's the same for you. Right. It's like, join the Navy, because joining the Army is stupid. Like, we don't need to go out there and like you get dirty, like living in mud. Right. We can be on a ship, and we're going to be smart. Right. We're going to be technical war fighters. Well, that's fine until shit goes sideways and you got to pull burning bodies out of after 2 ships collided or whatever. And so we didn't have sailors necessarily, enough sailors that had that kind of warrior mindset. And so they basically said, Admiral Richardson came out with his design for maritime superiority, and he released his 4 core attributes, one of them being toughness. And I'm the dumbass who's in an all hands call with the CNO. And I'm like, sir, well, okay, we're talking about toughness. Well, how the hell do you measure that? What is it specifically? And how do you measure it? Who knew my dumb ass would be figuring out those 2 questions like within 6 months later, right? I'm helping to create a program with a chaplain and a clinical psychologist based on mind, body, soul, and how we're going to start at boot camp to develop a proven program to get our sailors tougher.
Though I remember when this first came out, that's how I was saying too, bro. Warrior Toughness with a psychologist, a chaplain, and a Navy SEAL. That's kind of how they sold it too, man, with a Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
I was that man.
And you're the guy, huh?
Yeah, how and the reason for that is because you have 2 kind of resonant, right? You look at like what our lanes were supposed to be initially. Initially, it was like, hey, the SEAL is all about physical training. So the body piece, right? The mind, that's going to be about the psychologist, right? How do we get in there? Performance psychology, sports psychology, mindfulness training. And then the chaplain's going to be all things related to character, right? Not only do we need people that are fully committed because of their character and their investment, but they also have to be people that can make good moral and ethical decisions, right? As we kind of went through it, really, you have people, it's like, well, who's going to listen to a chaplain, right? You got some E5 sailors, some hardcore sailors. Who's going to listen to a chaplain? Who's going to listen to some psychologist? We need somebody who's kind of been in combat, that's trained people to be in combat, that could kind of represent the program. And that's kind of why I got picked.
And so when this topic first came across our desk, we had it on our notes to talk about on a podcast, and then we pushed it, and then we pushed it. And then we pushed it, and then it wasn't on our notes anymore, right? And I'm actually a little happy that, because what were we going to do? Well, we were going to read through a nav admin and most likely read through the fact sheet and talk about it as we kind of perceived it. So I'm actually happy. It's a blessing in disguise that we actually have you here for those questions. My first question is, when it was initially brought up to you, did you buy into the idea of Warrior Toughness?
I did. And here's why. Because now, did I buy into all facets of it? No. Were there some friction points between me and like some of the chaplains? Yes. But in the SEAL teams, it's all about, like, the one thing we're competitive. We are hungry. So we're constantly looking to level up our skills, our abilities, and what we're capable of. And so we always go to the experts. So it's like, hey, we're going to do some stuff in the mountains. Let's hire some of the best mountaineers in the world. Civilians are going to teach us how to do that. We want to be better at shooting. We're not going to learn from other SEALs. We're going to learn from professional competitive shooters. They're going to teach us. That's going to make us as good as we can be. And so when it comes to like, you're going to teach me some mental skills, because I knew that mental skills helped me like in difficult situations in the SEAL teams, right? But I didn't necessarily know enough to really apply them. And so I looked at it like, this is a great way. People need to be able to really maintain composure, because when you hear some of the stories about what happens when some of these ships collided, you have sailors that just were combat ineffective because they just lost their shit. They melted down. They could not. And you see this a lot now. Like you've had like a lot, like a lot of the younger generation, they feel more anxiety. They've never been allowed to fail. And so when they're faced with something like that, catastrophic, they don't know how to react. They react, but they don't necessarily know how to respond. And so that was really critical. It's like, hey, we're always in the SEAL teams looking for an edge, and so should you, because one day your shipmates, they may need you to fucking pull them out, right? What sailor's gonna show up that day? The combated effective one, or the one that's gonna help fight back and save that ship, right? I think it's like that.
Did you have to fight for anything? Like, let's say you had an idea, you wanted to incorporate something into the program. Did you ever have to fight to make sure something, like, for instance, like if somebody came up to me and they wanted me involved in something, it was a group project, let's say I'm making a cake, for instance, let's say it's a cake. And I'm like, hey, I don't give a fuck what we do. We going to keep the cookie crumbles on this cake. No matter how much we change it, no matter what we do, them cookie crumbles are staying on this damn cake. Was it ever anything that you had to make sure, hey, if I'm involved in this, for the sanctity of what we're calling this thing, this has to stay?
Not really. And I'll be honest, like I had certain contributions, but I would say, like, to be completely honest, like the chaplain, but especially the psychologist and some of the other psychologists, but primarily the main psychologist that I worked with, she did a shit ton of heavy lifting to get this program. And I would say of the three of us, like, she probably was the most important in terms of what was being delivered content wise. I think the fight is always, when you're talking about some shit like this, and I would guarantee that you have people within your commands, you talk weird toughness, that they're going to be naysayers, right? Because of how it's being sold. And really what I did was I helped demonstrate a proof of concept, right? We ran our program at boot camp through study control groups. We proved that it was effective, but like the delta remains. How do you actually get that and move it on to A schools and then ultimately the fleet? And so the thing that I started, my vision for where that would go would look quite a bit different, right? In terms of how we train. Like, everything that we should do should be training for high stress situations, for eliciting a certain response when it comes to performing under pressure and in the face of fear. And so I think buy-in is always, especially when you look at pushing it out to other commands. Like, people feel threatened by programs that, that they could see as taking away their power. It's not how I fucking did it in the 90s. So I'm going to resist it at every turn. Right. Yeah. So it's a lot of that.
So how were y'all able to observe, like, this program as you were doing, I'm going to say, like, beta tests, right? For lack of a better word, like beta tests. And you could give me a better word if you have one. But how were you all able to observe the progress and if this was working? Right.
So the first thing we did was we basically did a couple of what we call feasibility pilots. And so what that is we're not collecting data in terms of process improvement. We're collecting data with how we integrate this training, right? So you're going to have a study and control group, right? You're going to have, so for example, if we're doing what we call guided mindfulness exercise, let's say it's at nighttime, you're going to give people a certain exercise where they're going to go through there. They're going to start off with a breathing exercise. You're going to have them use imagery to visualize certain things to get them, and because it's all helping to really sharpen your frontal cortex. It's really helping. It's basically like you're bodybuilding for your brain. You're strengthening your brain. And so we would do that. And so we're going to do that. And that whole thing's going to take 10 minutes. Okay. Well, the division across the compartment across the other side of the ship, they're in the control group. And so they're going to be doing that exercise says 15 minutes. Okay. We're going to have them sit quietly for 15 minutes. Okay. Now, when we go to the pool, we're going to use a certain mental skill. We're going to use mental rehearsal to visualize, and especially if you're scared of the water, right? If you've never swam, then this is really, really effective. Somebody who's, super comfortable in the water. But again, it's just an opportunity. Line handling, things like that, where people are yelling at you, that's a different mental skill exercise, right? And so you would do that. The next division comes in and you just do something that's kind of randomized. Like it's not that mental skill, but it's doing something somewhat similar. So you can kind of compare apples to apples, right? And then after that, then you actually start to measure things, right? You start to measure inspection scores, right? When, you remember in boot camp, like you have to not only fold your clothes, but you have like the drill instructor, right, will come in and yell at you, your general orders and all that stuff, right? And you're graded individually, but also as division, right? Your PT scores, your entrance PT scores, your exit PT scores, all those little things are measured. What was interesting was, if you remember boot camp, people just want to break, right? People want to take a knee. So a lot of people are sick or hurt, right? They go to medical. And so what happens is you don't have as many people. Let's say you start off a division of, 200 people. And, typically maybe of that division, maybe 130 graduate on time. They may roll back to another division. But what we found was those that got, warrior toughness, we had less people trying to find comfort, right? So our on-time graduation rates now, instead of 130, are probably like 180 or something like that. So you're getting more people to the fleet faster, and you're saving the government money, and you're providing relief of sailors' butts and seats where they need to be.
Okay. So it's like people, I was just going to say, it's like people not putting their packs down because they've learned some exercises on how to be resilient. That's
right. Yeah. And so I think it's useful for me to define kind of what toughness was. We had to kind of define it, right? What's toughness? Because people be like, what's toughness versus resilience? And so we define it in 3 areas. The first one is take a punch and keep on going. And this has both a tactical definition as well as like an overall life definition. Example, right? Take a punch, keep on going, right? That's you on a ship, missiles just inbound, friends are killed, friends are wounded, you're hurt, got to get back up, you got to get back in the fight, right? Take a punch, keep going. Okay. Let's say you just suffered a loss in a relationship. Girlfriend, boyfriend broke up with you. You didn't get that promotion, right? That's a punch. You got to take that hit and you got to respond to it. And you got to get back in the fight, right? You got to keep moving forward. You got to perform under pressure. So think about it like, whatever it is that stresses you out in the job, like you got to get up there and you got to, if it's combat, right? Bullets are flying. You got to deal with that. You've also got to deal with it like in boot camp, right? When you've got to deal with like, I'm super stressed and now I got to go home. I got to walk through the front door of my house where my spouse is stressed. My kids are screaming and I got to effectively lead there too. I can't be a shit show in my house. I got to lead there. And then 3, you got to deal with day in, day out grind, right? And you look at that twofold, right? In special operations, right? The height of our combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, especially in Iraq, you may be going out 2-3 hits a night, right? It's constant, right? And after 6 months, you are mentally and physically spent. Right? The opposite side of that coin is, right, you're on a ship somewhere and you're watching a radar screen and 99.9% of the time, nothing happens. Yeah. But when it does, people die, right? If you're not locked on, if you're not switched on. So you have to be just as engaged at the end of that 6-month deployment. And so really it's getting about those things, that element of toughness, because resilience, like you remember like OSC, operational stress control, right? It's all about going from red back to green. Well, my point is, I don't give a shit if you can bounce back to where you were after you've dealt with a hardship. None of that means fuck all if you couldn't perform in the first place. I need to train you to perform in the first place, and then I want you to be able to bounce back to that same high level performer.
Hey, so my question is, the training for boot camp, when did that take place? Like you guys just went in or you guys added a week or two to boot camp?
No, we just, I don't think we didn't really add much. We just, we kind of refined it. We tweaked. That's what we did the feasibility pilots to make sure that we could smoothly inject that into our training. Right. And I don't remember exactly, like I didn't really have that task for the actual, the schedule flexing of that, but it really didn't add much time. We streamlined a few things, but you're talking like exercises before certain events, right? And it's like we're teaching this class, right? And it's an introduction, right? It's like boot camp. It's like going to Buds, right? Like I learned how to do combat diving at Buds. I'm not capable of going out and doing a real world ship attack now in an enemy harbor. No,
Yeah.
I need to keep going. And that's the challenge, right? Is how do we take that very basic warrior toughness and grow it and export it and expand it, right? So in terms of the schedule, like it's nighttime exercises or whenever, it's like on the spot. And also like one of the key signature things that we had is recalibrate, right? You think about this recruit or anybody in training. Like in the example I always use is firefighting. You have a recruit, first time away from home. The parents maybe never made them do anything hard. They're stressed out. They miss home. They haven't been sleeping. And that the instructor's yelling at them and they get overwhelmed. They just fucking lock up, right? You've seen that look of overwhelm, combat ineffectiveness loss, training value loss. We tell that recruit to recalibrate on the spot. Now they've already been trained how to do this. When we tell them to recalibrate, they remember, okay, I'm going to lower my energy by doing some very specific slow breathing exercises. And once I've calmed down a little bit, we're going to tell them what their kind of objectives are, and we're going to push them back into the fire. And so we teach them that, constantly telling them how to recalibrate so that they can learn how to cope with stress on the fly. Because next time they have that feeling, it may be for real. And we got to get them to be able to navigate through that stress.